So I was leaving work, like, this really just happened, and I was just thinking about the incredible films of Kenji Mizoguchi. And this thought was rudely interrupted by the fact that I had stepped outside the building for all of 3 seconds when it started raining. So I had no choice but to forge ahead through this sudden downpour. And my lady, being the wonderful person that she is, texted me. She said, "Oh, baby, I hope that you're, at home as quick as possible and nice and warm and cozy." And I texted her back, "Oh, darling, the rain isn't what's bothering me. It's the fact that I'm not with you. And if we were together, I would tell you about the thing that really is bothering me about Gen 5 OU. And it's not the rain, it's Reuniclus." So, yeah, we are here not because this is the latest installment of me complaining about something regarding Gen 5 OU, but because I am trying to take an active role in enacting some sort of positive change because it feels realistic now. So if we need this, if this is the extra push we need to make it happen, I am happy to do so because I am still soaked to the bone, but what I really want is to get I don't know where I was going with that. Okay, so the replay I have on the screen is from SPL Finals 9 years ago. This is not much of a game because it just turns into a bunch of paraspam and spikes and ends in a Calm Mind Reuniclus war. It's awesome. If you have tried to team build in Black and White OU, and you have tried to make a team that is consistent, really checking all the boxes, then it is likely you have happened upon the thought that all good team building in Gen 5 OU leads down the road, ending in a Calm Mind Reuniclus mirror. Logically, if we're being perfectly super logical about it, that's what every team and every game should be. Because Reuniclus is just too perfectly situated in the metagame to do what it does over and over and over again. And I picked this replay because around this time, people were starting to realize, hey, this Reuniclus spikes thing might be a problem. I mean, look, this was a chaotic metagame. We were still dealing with Sun at the time. But, even with Busted Sun, and Doug Trio and stuff like that, then Reuniclus was a major, major issue. And funnily enough, Reuniclus was actually considered broken for the first time in early 2011 after the first couple rounds of suspect testing had passed, and we weren't dealing with Deoxys Attack and Darkrai, so we were dealing with, more reasonable Pokemon like Blaziken. So, around this time, people were already saying, hey, this Magic Guard thing is really, really stupid. I don't like having to use Scizor on every team, because this was the age of Scizor. And then it kind of fell off for a while. Again, not really for the most reasonable reasons. I mean, people were starting to use Spadef Pear Song Celebi to answer it, and it was cool at the time, but if we went back to that time period now, we would make Reuniclus teams the exact same way we do now still. Because Pear Song only has 8 PP, and you can, at the time there was no Magic Guard Alakazam, so you could run Choice Band T-Tar more easily, so it just wound up not really being much of an issue. But yeah, Reuniclus kind of fell to the wayside for a while, to the point where Spadef Celebi wasn't even running Parasong anymore, like ever. So, then fast forward some years to this, 2015, 4 years later, and people had started to realize, a couple players, back in 2013, I was making this Reuniclus team. Badass had a great Reuniclus team. I think there were some... That's Just Peachy had one that TV Rocket and Parengon used. But it was, occasional use. It wasn't like, oh, this thing is really broken. But then, as it was experimented with more and more by lefties, by Heist, people realized, oh, this thing is actually really stupid. Because it's a very simple premise. With spikes, everything else gets worn down and KO'd. And not just spikes, but passive damage in general. And Reuniclus outlasts everything, and it's not just immune to passive damage, it is also crazy bulky and boosts with Calm Mind, and yeah, so it's incredibly difficult to stop, and it was very quickly realized that the most reliable quote-unquote way to beat Reuniclus was to beat it with your own Reuniclus. So all sorts of fun stuff was tried. Speed creep to win the Calm Mind Reuniclus war, or to outspeed and have more chances to crit, and Life Orb to 2 a KO with Psyshock at +6, Signal Beam, which is making a bit of a resurgence now. And that very simple premise is what continues to haunt us today, because it's now 9 years later, we have just banned Cloyster, and the floor has been opened up to what's next on the chopping block, because Gen 5OU is very well known for having a litany of issues, and no one can agree, you know, whether we should ban Thunderous Therian or unban Lugia. You know, some things are more realistic than others, but yeah, so we basically stand today with the same issue we had 9 years ago because, well, I'll walk you through it very quickly. Basically, a thread was started by none other than yours truly, and this was at the same time as the Sun discussion, and I will link this in the pinned comment for your leisurely reading, as always. But yeah, there was some agreement, and then a lot of disagreement, and then it devolved into an argument about Scald, of all things, actually. But Heist, a.k.a. the Grand Babito, a.k.a. Babidi 1998, because he was going through a whole identity crisis with wanting to have a wacky username. He was a big anti-Reuniclus proponent, because he was spamming Reuniclus spikes like nobody else. To show you another example, this battle he had against Ojama for Black and White Cup. Look at those teams. On one hand, we have Reuniclus spikes on both sides, of course, and a total of 3 Lotties in this game. Yeah, it's ridiculous. We're not going to watch it because it's insanely long. And it's just hazards and Lotties and waiting for Reuniclus, and yeah. So, good lord. We're skipping to the end and continuing with the thread. That's the point. So, yeah, it ends in a Calm Mind Reuniclus war where Heist does not crit, and good lord, of course it ended in a Reuniclus war. Yeah, so very fun after 165 turns. So yeah, this thread devolves into nonsense very quickly, and the reason why I'm sympathetic, not necessarily just to a Reuniclus ban, but to a Spikes ban or a Magic Guard ban, just something, because the issue is not just Reuniclus is super busted. Like, as great as Trick Room Reuniclus is, that's not really the issue, I don't think. It's more the fact that it revolves around spikes. And there's a great post later in this thread, I think it's mentioned here, where he calls it Reuniclus, even though he knows that's not what it is, because it's wacky to occasionally spell things in a funny way. Yeah, there's a great post here, which the basic idea is that it's not just that Reuniclus is a Spikes abuser, it's that Reuniclus is a response to Spikes. However, with tiering in modern Black and White, I hate to say it, but we have to be pragmatic and not super idealistic, or we would throw out Drizzle, Scald, Spikes, all this nonsense. That's not happening. We are dealing with more realistic options. So, of the most realistic options right now, I would say Reuniclus, Excadrill, Thunderous Therian, or I should order it. Reuniclus and Thunderous Therian are very, very likely. Excadrill and Latios are also issues, but those are less likely for reasons I'll get into in a second. But yeah, spinning is bad, and then it's all about hazards and Reuniclus responding to it and then being the best abuser of it, and we just go in this cycle over and over again. So yeah, it's a very frustrating thing, because the history of what wound up happening was that Excadrill got dropped, and everyone kind of forgot Reuniclus existed, and everyone thought it was fine. And then like 2 years later, oh wait, this thing is still broken. And then everyone no longer thought it was fine anymore. Actually, maybe like 3 years later, people were like, oh wait, this thing is actually still busted. And then people just kind of forgot about Reuniclus again. I'm convinced at this point it's because people were bored. You know, because nothing changed about the metagame to make it less conducive to Reuniclus. Sometimes this just happens. The top players who are dictating the metagame get bored of using a certain style and try using something else. And it's not that Reuniclus ever stopped being good. It's just that they got bored of using it and there was no action against it or anything. So it's like, well, it just kind of the metagame naturally gravitated away from it. No, the player base gravitated towards wanting to use something new, not because, you know, if the player base was all like ABR, who never gets bored of using optimal stuff, then I think we would have forced this issue a while ago. Anyway, so this kept happening. You know, oh, it's broken again, it's forgotten again. It's broken again, it's forgotten again. And now we are at a tipping point because this is the 4th year in a row we're arguing about the fundamental issues of black and white. Now, of course, I give major credit to the bans that have taken place. So we've gotten rid of Gems, and now we've gotten rid of Cloister outright. So yeah, that brings us to today. So why not Latios and Thunder or Excadrill? Because those are clearly pretty busted. Sandforce Excadrill is also because of spikes. Well, I touched on this more in my video I did with Pang, so I won't rehash that entirely. You can check that out. But the basic idea is that they're more of a foundation of the tier, and realistically, the castle comes crumbling down so entirely without them that it's like, oh, you just replace Latios with Latias, which is less powerful. Well, Latios' biggest strength is enabling Alakazam and Reuniclus, basically. You know, together there, and Latias does that just as well. You force in T-Tar, spikes do the rest, and it's nasty. And without Excadrill, you are taking away one of the few ways of thwarting Reuniclus. Right now, if you want to see how optimized this whole Magic Guard business is, here's an SPL game from this past SPL where Reuniclus is flanked by Magikarp, Clefable, and Bronzong, and Latios, and of course, Spikes. So we're still going here. You know, what kind of quelled the dominance of these teams for a while was the presence of a new broken element in Cloister and the various hyper offensives. First with Gems, and then just Cloister outright. So now we are getting back to the norm, and that's basically why this video is being made, because some people, as we skip to the end of this replay, some people are saying, oh, let's see where the metagame goes from here, and I want to address how fallacious that is. So yeah, if you ban Latios, you have this cascading problem where Reuniclus is still there with spikes. And unless you want to start banning Latias too, and then Keldeo after that, and Thunderous Therian, and all that stuff, I mean, I personally would not be opposed. Do I think that's realistic to happen? No, and it's tough enough to get people to turn out and ban something that's actually broken, you know, just once, let alone a whole chain, a cascading, you know, barrage of brokens. You know, it's an old gen. I don't like change. People are like, oh, just don't play the gen if you don't like it. It's like, well, we're invested. That's why the change is being made, and there's no arguing with an argument like that. So you kind of have to make some concessions, and I have accepted that. Frustrating as it is to my more quixotic side. I still can't pronounce that word, quixotic, because, anyway, idealistic. So, to a fault, definitely. Yeah, so you can't ban Excadrill because it makes the spikes issue even worse. Again, Excadrill does not solve the Reuniclus spikes issue, but without Excadrill, the issue is clearly much worse. So, yeah. So Thunderous Therian, I mean, still definitely on the table, but, in bad arguments about, oh, Rain will be less viable, I don't want, you know, that aside, which is completely not our argument, the thing with the Reuniclus is that it is not a foundational Pokemon. It is not like Latios and Excadrill, which are really holding the tier together. And if you get rid of Reuniclus, it is not checking something that is so important to the tier that without it, you have to ban that thing. You know, Reuniclus is a great defensive Pokemon, don't get me wrong, it checks so much. but it's really checking that stuff en route to being a broken threat itself, and not checking it in the sense that, say, Lando T or Gliscor are essential defensive forces to have the stuff in the game, and that's why Cloyster was so busted, because it turned them into one-turn setup auto wins. So that's a dynamic that is necessary. More the Lando T's and the Gliscors of the world. Reuniclus' defensive presence, far from necessary. You know, in an ideal world, even if its defensive presence is necessary, if it's broken, you can it, and then you can the broken things after. But we are not dealing in that idealistic world. We have to be more practical. So fortunately, we don't even have to go down that rabbit hole, because Reuniclus is not keeping anything essential in check. Or Reuniclus is not essential in keeping anything in check, I should say. So, yeah, that's one thing. So, the other argument is, wait, and here's another post of mine, of course. But yeah, I agree with this initial response. You know, it's oppressive, it's been for years, always pops up broken when we think the tier is settled. That's basically it. Like, that has been the history of the tier. Like, we're dealing with something else that's broken, like Sandrosh Excadrill Rain, and then it's Dugtrio Sun. And, you know, Reuniclus takes a backseat then. As soon as the metagame calms down, oh, right, this thing has been broken all along. And I would love for spikes to be banned, because if you ban spikes, you don't have the Excadrill issue as much. You know, and you're going to have a much easier time dealing with Latios as well. Reuniclus becomes a lot more manageable. Alakazam, who's going to even use Alakazam practically? That's an exaggeration, but still. But I cannot see that happening. I would be in full support of that happening, of course. Or Magic Guard, as at the beginning of this thread, McMegan made a great post about, oh, here's Reuniclus in the original post. And I won't rehash McMegan's thing, but suspect Magic Guard overall. Yes, it's too good, too easy to use. I agree. I'm very against like Pokemon that are just too safe. But that's not the point. The point is, there has generally been sentiment, you know, among the player base. A lot of the other stuff is contentious. Can't do Latios, can't do Thundurus, can't do Excadrill for whatever reason. But Reuniclus has been gaining traction, and this is not me appealing to the the vast majority opinion. Even though, like, with our system, we kind of do that anyway. But I think a lot of other qualified people believe this as well. So, just in case you think, oh, this is another one of BKC's crazy ideas, like banning Scald, which, for the record, I'm still very much a proponent of. But Reuniclus is forcing the same unhealthy dynamics it always has. So, and players are realizing, okay, now it actually feels like an option. We've gotten rid of the previous crazy thing, the cheese of Cloyster. So, okay, Reuniclus. Now, the anti-Reuniclus faction, let's call them, has been saying, wait, let's wait for the metagame to settle a little bit. And there's a post here which I think was deleted because I was responding to it. That's why I even posted, and now I can't find it anymore. Okay, so I think that deleted post was there, but then there was a discussion on Discord where a lot of the stuff happens. Reuniclus has been gaining traction in the thread, as you can see here, but even by famed anti-banner conflict, let me tell you, this guy would tell you to outplay, you know, a guy chasing you with an axe. You know, he's like, oh no, that's not the best example I could have thought of, but whatever, dude, I'm tired and I got rained on, and anyway, even though nothing rains on my parade like Reuniclus does. So the response to the Reuniclus problem is, okay, let's see how the metagame has settled, right? We can't ban something else so quickly after Cloyster. Cloyster has been, and just for some visual stimulation, I will go back to this replay and let you watch it if you're so inclined, even though it's utterly monstrous, so enjoy if you like that. Anyway, so, oh, you know, we just banned Cloyster. Let's see where the metagame goes from here. Let's see how it develops. Let's see if there are any changes to Reuniclus. It's not a bad idea in principle. You know, I understand. After a ban, you want to see where the metagame goes. The problem is, with this line of thinking, we have 9 years of evidence, you know, maybe even arguably more, that what Reuniclus does is unhealthy, right? That is pretty much inarguable. You know, even the most stalwart and don't ban anything players would say, yeah, the Magic Guard Sand Spikes thing is not healthy. We're even seeing Reuniclus Hail used at high levels of success, so it's pretty much just Reuniclus as a whole. So there was a whole dynamic about punishing safe Reuniclus Sands when Cheese was present, and the gems, and then just Cloister as a whole, hyper offense stuff. But the thing was that Reuniclus was pretty much impossible to stop without this cheesy stuff, right? And Reuniclus was already an issue then. So then we enter this new period where people were taking bigger risks in the team builder because they wanted to beat the Reuniclus stuff so badly. They were willing to have worse matchups against things like Rain. So then you had the whole matchup triangle dilemma. Oh, hyper offense destroys Reuniclus style Sand, and Sand dumps on Rain, and Rain dumps on the hyper offense Cheese stuff. So, where do we go from here? So we started by nerfing hyper offense, and then we realized, look, this hyper offense stuff, it's too good. It's too, whether it's too good, whatever you want to call it, too uncompetitive, cheesy, not a desirable element to have in the metagame. Just the fact is that Cloister and the kind of teams it enabled were not very interactive. It was just bombarding weak points with too much reward for too little. Incidentally, too much reward for too little is kind of how you can describe Reuniclus, because it's very simple. You get the spikes, and any idiot can get spikes very easily in black and white, considering how good the spikers are. And then you just kind of, with basic competence, you sit back and wait for Reuniclus to outlast things. It's the easiest thing in the world. So you can say, oh, well, the metagame has evolved against Reuniclus. You have skill swap Bronzong, Encore Clefable. Those low PP, just like Parasong Celebi wasn't good before, those aren't good either, because Reuniclus' whole thing is the long game. And you cannot outlast Reuniclus with anything besides your own Reuniclus reliably. I mean, you can go, oh, SD Gliscor, yeah, and HP Isis and Good Night. Or Life Orb Psychic, or, that's the whole thing. You have to dedicate, if you're running a team that is not hyper offense, you have to dedicate pretty much half the team to Reuniclus as many guises. It is ridiculous. So, since this is not really feasible, if you want to be halfway decent against the rest of the metagame, the most consistent option tends to be, oh, you have some anti-Reuniclus options, but you're also going to be using Reuniclus yourself, not just because it counters other Reuniclus, but because it's so busted yourself. You want to give yourself that tool. So, we dealt with the hyper offense aspect. Gems were too much, Cloister's too much, it's gone, right? So, notice the pattern from the previous history. Reuniclus was broken, then something more broken emerged, we dealt with that, and while we were dealing with that, Reuniclus kind of took a back seat, right? So, before it was the Excadrill Sandrush Rain, and the Dugtrio Sun, and whatever it was. And then after that, Reuniclus kept popping up and being a problem. And this is just the latest instance of that. We've seen even in this past SPL where Reuniclus has, and even before that, Reuniclus is really coming back with the cheese styles, the hyper offense styles, really getting weaker and weaker. I mean, they were still super busted, but they were now not so overwhelming that you weren't that you would risk a matchup loss as easily. I mean, people were using Citrus Berry Reuniclus to deal with Cloister, which was nuts. But the point being that hyper offense was no longer as high a risk for completely running you over, just for bringing this otherwise very reliable style, and thus, with Cloister axing hyper offense almost entirely, we are now back to that state of quote-unquote stability, aka the norm that we have gotten adjusted to. And in that norm we have gotten adjusted to, Reuniclus Spikes is still the issue for the same reasons it has always been. So, with that idea of, oh, let's see where the metagame goes, we know where the metagame is going. We have seen it play out over and over and over and over. Every shift away from Reuniclus over the past 9 years has either been player base idiocy, thinking, oh, Excadrill makes Spikes and Reuniclus more palatable, which, was being warned against even before Excadrill was freed, but then enough of the player base was like, yeah, you know what, or never mind, it's fine, no, Reuniclus isn't an issue anymore, or, getting bored of it, and then more broken things, but it always comes back to Reuniclus over and over. And there is no development, none at all, that makes Reuniclus spikes less good, or less busted, or whatever it is. Whatever you can name, it's still going to do the same things it always does. I mean, God, it terrorizes Rain. Politoed uses Encore as much as it does because it is one of the few things keeping Reuniclus from immediately trampling Rain. It is ridiculous. Without Reuniclus, you would not see Encore. Not that Encore's a bad move, but it wants to run some other moves too. So, Reuniclus is trampling everything the same way it always does with spikes and outlasting everything, and the most reliable way is your own Reuniclus over and over and over and over again. So, the idea that we would have to wait and see where Reuniclus stands in this new metagame is not... I'm not saying you have to do this tomorrow, but I'm speaking specifically because whenever we deal with suspects and old gens, we always think, oh, we don't want to mess up that next tournament. Let's wait until that next tournament. It's a nice idea, but not very practical, because you say to yourself, well, there's always a tournament around the corner. When are you ever not messing up a tournament? You are going to have to take some sort of plunge sometime. And this is, especially the case for more unknown quantities. Like if we ban Latios, I understand that's a much more drastic shift. Reuniclus is not as foundational to the tier 2, but we also know that Reuniclus is busted. We do not need to test this new metagame to see. The Latios thing, I don't think I thought that through as well as... No, I did, because it's not as foundational. Pardon me there. But yes, the idea that with Cloister gone, it is some new metagame we need to adjust to and see where it goes. This is not uncharted territory. I post that in the thread, but I can't stress it enough. We have been in this position before. We just keep going back to metagame is calm now, or calmer, whatever. What passes for calm in Gen 5. And that means Reuniclus. I mean, Reuniclus was already getting set to do this while Cloister was still around. Why would Cloister leaving somehow make it more palatable? It's a fairy tale. It's made up. It's nonsense. It is the equivalent of those policy review threads where someone goes, oh, you know what? Some hypothetical new player might be scared of a complex ban, so let's not do a complex ban. It doesn't exist. We know what Reuniclus does. We do not need to wait and see. So now people are saying, oh, let's wait until after Classic's over. Why do we have to wait until Classic's over? If Reuniclus is broken, which we have almost a decade of evidence that it is, then why should we subject that tournament to its brokenness? Just for not... rocking the boat a little bit because it's comfortable, because, oh, we need more proof of this thing being busted. I'm sorry, it's the arguments I have seen for this. I participated in one on Discord earlier, my favorite pastime. Then nothing beats going to the bathroom and checking what's going on in the world of Pokemon and then getting stuck in that argument for way too long. And then people going like, hey, you were in there for a while. It's like, oh yeah, no, I had a big lunch. There's the issue that's the arguments I have been presented with for, oh, let's just wait a little while. It's like, well, you don't know. It might change. And I really, really hate this line of thinking. It reminds me of these arguments that were thrown around in the don't suspect test anything days of XY with this wildly inept council that were saying, well, you don't know that the metagame will be better if something gets banned. It's like, well, you never know. What kind of proof do you expect? That's why you have tests. If you needed 100% guaranteed, clairvoyant knowledge that the metagame would be better, then you would never have suspect tests because you would never have that. Complete nonsense. And this idea is ringing similar alarm bells for me, because the idea is, oh, well, just wait and see if it changes. You might develop. It's like, please tell me, what new development is there going to be? I know you can't say the future. Well, we don't know what's going to develop, but here is what I am contrasting this. I am contrasting this with years and years, almost a decade, of people looking for the best Reuniclus answers, the most reliable Reuniclus answers, and the problem is always, 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 always the same. Whatever Reuniclus answers we have available to us, I mean, yes, there are Reuniclus answers that are available, but they are all flawed and exploitable, and Reuniclus teams keep beating them. You know, often Reuniclus itself keeps beating them. It takes very little adaptation because Calm Mind, Recover, plus whatever 2 attacks, and the supporting cast of not just Sand, Hail now too, and Spikes is just making it absolutely insane. Oh, and you know, this is a good point that was raised earlier, excuse me. Paralysis. You know, if you para that T-Tar, that opposing Reuniclus or whatever, it just makes it even more nightmarish to deal with. You know, it's like, oh, T-Tar answered Latios because nothing else answers Latios because it's broken. Latios is his T-Wave, and now you are completely, I mean, even more hapless against the Reuniclus. It was going to wear you down with Spikes anyway, but now, you know, you just lose to it one-on-one. Good lord. So, I generally don't love this line of thinking, but I think a decade, pretty much, is long enough to say, okay, we have looked for the Reuniclus answers, and they are all flawed. Reuniclus keeps beating them. We are not going to find something else. And here's my tidbit, to be completely fair. If, in the future, the metagame develops in such a way that we say, you know what? Reuniclus Spikes would be totally manageable because of insert fictional thing here that would somehow make Reuniclus totally palatable. You know, if that pops up, then, you know, you can quote this to me and say, BKC, you know what, you should campaign for Reuniclus to be unbanned because now the metagame would totally handle it fine because it has somehow flipped into the state where Magic Guard Spikes weather is, I mean, it doesn't even need weather, I'm pretty sure, but whatever, Magic Guard Spikes passive damage is totally manageable now. You know, and if that happens, I will campaign for Reuniclus's unban like I'm campaigning for its ban now. But it's the idea that we should have to delay this Pokemon we know is broken at this time where we have the perfect opportunity to continue the momentum of improving Black and White, finally, and we should have to put that on hold because we have to see what we already know. It's like, you know, yeah, let's watch Reuniclus nonsense play out for the millionth time just so we know, you know, when we have all this evidence that it's going to do the same thing, and, you know, maybe leave some room for some unknown Reuniclus answer to pop up, or for Sableye to suddenly become viable, even though it has been absolutely terrible for also close to a decade. And no, I'm sorry, I cannot abide such arguments at all, and that's why this video is being made. To communicate the urgency. Again, I'm not saying tomorrow, I'm not saying you have to, you know, rush into this. You know, a survey is being put out by the Gen 5 Council, which I'm, you know, very happy about. That they're, and I mean, the fact that Finch opened the thread to more discussion, you know, I'm very happy about that too, that the Council is actively participating and looking for, you know, more input, and yeah, let's keep this train rolling, or keep this ball rolling, whatever, dude. In terms of, you know, improving and finding what the next thing is, you know, it's always going to be contentious, but Reuniclus has by far the most support, so let's serve the community with the, you know, in the way that tiering is supposed to, and proceed with it, and not give in to these very empty arguments that we should wait and see. I mean, look, wait and see, sure, but, you know, whatever the timeline is, I don't know when the next, when Classic is. I think it starts in, like, August or something. So, you know, wait a month, sure, whatever. But the fact that we should have to suffer through more tournament play with Reuniclus doing Reuniclus things because we have to see when we know we have seen it for so long, I think is incredibly foolish. And I would really urge, you know, whoever's listening to this, whoever's, you know, planning on participating or has some sway, whatever, to not have some sort of blind, illogical need for process and arbitration, you know, get in the way of doing what we're going to wind up doing anyway, I'm pretty sure. You know, why put another tournament through this silliness? Yeah, so that's basically it from me. I hope Reuniclus's time in Gen 5 OU is drawing to a close. I also made this video to try, open up discussion for people who might think, oh, is it really that broken? I mean, oh yes, it is. Reuniclus is the reason why Excadrill was unbanned. Pretty much why we changed the entire way we structure our rule sets. Just so we could bring Excadrill back, was to try and curb Reuniclus, and we said it's not going to help. And it hasn't 9 years later. So let's make it happen. Thank you so much for watching / listening. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.